This week we'll be talking about reviewing and critiquing the literature. This is going to tie in some of our previous lectures on how to read a research article and how to find research articles. Following this chapter, you'll be able to explain the different purposes that literature reviews can serve. You'll also be able to describe strategies for searching the published literature, also critiquing the quality of papers in the published literature, and lastly, write a literature review on a topic represented in the published literature in your area of interest. So some of the objectives that I went over, we've already kind of touched base on during the lectures of how to read a research article and how to find research articles. But this is going to go add a little bit more information on top of that. So we already kind of talked about what the difference is between a original research paper, a literature review, and a meta-analysis paper consists of, but we'll kind of go a little bit more in depth on this, or kind of, if anything, give you a review so this is kind of ingrained into your brain. But a literature review provides an overview of the state of current research on a topic of interest. So part of this class and part of your assessment is to write a literature review on the topic of your interest, and this is going to have to be approved by me. Also, with literature reviews, some may be comprehensive and lengthy as far as how many pages they are, or some of them might be focused or kind of a little bit more focused on a certain topic and very short in nature, depending on a lot of factors on the length of literature reviews. And this is mainly due to the available evidence out there, the current research, and then how you kind of want to kind of set it up per se on what should be done for the future research studies as well. And lastly, depending on what or how focused you want to write about that topic. Do you want to just mainly focus on, say, if you are looking at resistance training, are you mainly just focus on creatine supplementation and how it affects skeletal muscle and performance? Or are you kind of broadening that term to, supplements in general, which there's a whole bunch of. Part of literature reviews they are commonly used as part of the introductory material for theses or dissertations. So during this time, you're kind of doing a literature review, so you're setting up the story and your rationale on why you're performing this research during your master's or PhD program. And lastly, you're providing some very short literature review in the introduction of the research paper. So it's not as lengthy compared to a thesis or dissertation. You just want to kind of maybe add, a few research studies talking about the area, and then kind of moving on to the purpose and then conducting your study. Just a reminder, a literature review or a review paper differs from original research papers, where the original research papers include methods and results. So when we talk about original research papers, this is describing a single research study, and this is where we have participants coming into a laboratory setting or whatever kind of study that you're doing, and then they are following some sort of protocol. And we look at the original research papers, they follow some sort of ordered component as far as, headings and subsections, where the review paper doesn't follow a specific order. It kind of, the subsections or headings that you have within a literature review paper will vary depending on what topics you want to cover. But just to review the original research paper components one is it contains an abstract. And this is going to represent a concise summary of the work at the very beginning of the paper. So the summary is going to be consisting of the short introduction, methods, statistical analysis, results, discussions, conclusion, whatever the case may be. Next part is the introduction section. This is describing the rationale for and the purpose of the study, and also it's involving some sort of short review of the related literature. So when you look at the paper that we just read by Lowry and colleagues, they're prescribing some sort of rationale on why they are looking at a pre-workout supplement and why they want to look at it in trained individuals. And within that study, they explain that it hasn't been done or seen before, utilizing a pre-workout supplement and then looking at it long-term, particularly in trained individuals. Also, they provide some sort of examples of the literature about the ingredients that are being utilized or that are in the pre-workout that they're going to be testing. So with that, they gave an example of, I think it was creatine, and they can also give other examples as well on how it increases performance. So it's tying in to their story for the audience, so that whenever they do the study, this is the reason why they're doing it. The other section is the method section. This is where the researchers are explaining what they did. So remember, this is very important. This is kind of like your ingredient list to cookies, blueberry muffins, a pie, or whatever, where we have participants perform measurements, and within that we have to be very specific when we write them out, particularly if we're publishing them to a journal. So this is allowing other researchers to replicate your study, or another thing that they can do is that they can add to your study. But the main goal is to have researchers, if they were to perform the same study, kind of produce similar results, or they may find the results are different, and that it could be due to a variety of reasons, or if anything, if they kind of add to it, kind of build upon your research for gaining new information in that line of area. The results section is where the outcomes are presented of the study. Also, with the original research papers, it's also going to have a discussion section where this is going to be interpreting the results of the study that was just performed, providing some sort of rationale or some sort of physiological explanation on why they saw increases, decreases, or no response at all in their protocol. And most of the time, research or original research papers are going to have a conclusion section or subsection within the discussion, and this is at the very end of the paper where that's located at. If they don't have a subtitle where it says conclusion, this is just usually going to be the last paragraph of the discussion, and in a way they'll kind of have a sentence, or their topic sentence or their beginning sentence of that last paragraph is going to kind of have the in conclusion, blah blah blah, and so forth. So our preferred method of research articles is the original research paper, but literature reviews are quite valuable actually for interested readers, since it presents the essential elements of a number of published works or the original research on the chosen topic all in one paper. So if you find an interesting claim or sentence from the literature review, you can look at that reference and then go back to reference section and find that original research study and read that. But when we look at review papers, many journals that usually just publish original research papers will also occasionally publish literature review papers or review papers. So by reading these review papers from these journals, this kind of enables you to quickly become familiar with the primary issues related to a particular area of the research. And when we think of the goals of writing a literature review, they'll vary, and these will either hit, the literature review will either hit all of these, or maybe one of these. It will all depend on how the authors write it. But one of the goals is that it's going to inform readers about one or more important recent discoveries. Another goal of a literature review is to kind of foster appreciation for the historical development, or it might provide a comprehensive analysis of a topic area. And some of them might have a presenting of some sort of opposing viewpoints on a certain subject. When we think of that, the author who's actually writing the review paper may take a neutral perspective in summarizing some of the findings of the original research papers, or they might choose to kind of construct the review in such a way to support a particular perspective, whether that's negative or positive. Whenever you're kind of preparing to undertake your research project for your thesis or dissertation, the literature review that you're writing for this has a different purpose compared to the literature review seen and published in journals. So the first step in identifying the specific question you kind of design your research to answer is just acquiring a solid, thorough understanding of the related topic of the published literature out there. So the reason why we do this is to kind of gain a better understanding, which is necessary to make it clear what is very important towards your project and what is remaining unanswered. So what are some questions out there that need to be filled, such as, is it long-term? Is it looking at individuals who are trained or with certain comorbidities such as diabetes or hypertension or anything of like that nature? So by doing this, research study, this is going to help set this up and then kind of address within your thesis or dissertation as well. Some other things is that this literature review will also demonstrate the approach, the procedures that you're going to do. So the certain, measurements and testing times and everything, your instrumentation. So what devices you're utilizing to collect the data, and the plan to use, other things as well. It could be, gift cards if you have some funding. It could be, possibly a collaboration within another department or another researcher at a different university. But other things you can also include is some past equipment that other researchers have utilized and kind of build upon that, so you can kind of compare an old technique and kind of compare the new technique. But lastly, with this whole purpose of your thesis and dissertation, the written review is to kind of demonstrate that your own knowledge of the literature related to the topic you're proposing to study is very sufficient. When we find literature reviews, these are primarily based on original research papers. The original research papers go through a peer review system, in which we'll talk about later in this lecture, and also I kind of touched on it last lecture as well. But the literature reviews, these are pretty much summarizing the research-based information, and they're not, providing you information from undocumented sources. So these are, credible sources that have been through a peer review process. But with searching these literature reviews, if you're mentioning opinions stated by the authors of a review paper, you must clearly define them as such, and to not treat these as the same as the results of the original paper. Other things to kind of consider for the literature reviews are there are different resources to assist you in locating original research papers and literature reviews. So we touched on this in past lectures on how to find a research article. We'll quickly go over and kind of refresh you on those different search engines. Just to refresh, the major search engine for research articles is PubMed. With PubMed, we can find literature reviews, we can find meta-analysis, but what we're really looking for is the original research papers. Remember, there's also alternatives compared to PubMed, such as Google Scholar, and then ResearchGate. With ResearchGate, that's, again, the social media aspect with other researchers where you can follow each other, and with that, you can send a request for a full text if you can't access it through PubMed or Google Scholar. It'll kind of give them a notification, just because those authors that write the paper will always receive a full text of that paper that was published. Sometimes, with certain journals or certain websites or universities, depending on your subscription base, you may not have access to it. So this is another way, or ResearchGate is another way to gain full access to original research paper. Other ways to find original research papers, literature reviews, or meta-analysis is through the Lindenwood University Library. Here's the link for that. You can also, again, do the interlibrary loan, where you're requesting an article if you can't access the full text through PubMed, Google Scholar, or if the researcher that you requested the full text for the original research paper never responds. Just a little bit of background of PubMed. So we know this is a free service, but this free service is provided by the U.S. National Library of Medicine. PubMed supplies the links to abstracts and full-text articles related to over 21 million citations from the biomedical literature, kind of dating back to the 1950s. So PubMed serves as an excellent source for topics in the life sciences field, exercise sciences, and biomedical sciences. The National Center for Biotechnology Information, NCBI, provides free online access to biomedical and biological research publications and data, including PubMed. Also, this search engine enables researchers to set up automatic searches on a monthly or weekly basis, which can be useful just because at a certain time you get busy, you don't always have time to always look for the most up-to-date research. So by having automatic searches monthly, this is gonna look at and bring up the most recent literature in that field. For topics related to physical education, a good starting place or search engine is the Education Resources Information Center, or ERIC. So similar to PubMed, ERIC is a free online service that provides links to bibliographic records of journal articles and then other education-related materials with some links, with full texts or the abstracts. So ERIC is sponsored by the U.S. Department of Education Institute of the Education Sciences, with access provided to more than 1.2 million sources. With the growing use of iPads, tablets, also utilizing your phone, since our phones can do a lot more nowadays, we can download apps to look for research articles. And some of these apps are Core Mobile, PubChase, and Questia. These apps you can utilize to find research articles, but some of the things or limitations is these aren't as well developed as kind of the online, using your laptop or desktop search engines, but they can be utilized if you're in a pinch or just want to quickly look something up. There are several publishing companies to offer paid subscriptions for accessing research articles. So these paid subscriptions are just like, the subscriptions that you are paying for, like Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, Apple Music, Spotify. So you kind of get the gist of it. But one of the publishing companies that offer this paid subscription is Science Direct. This is provided by the publishing company Elsevier, which allows access to over 8 million articles. And with Science Direct, this is looking at articles relating to physical sciences and engineering, life sciences, health sciences, social sciences, and humanities. So part of this is also going with the health sciences, looking at exercise science related material. But most of the time, it's worthwhile finding out if your institution's library, such as Lindenwood, has a subscription for you to access one of these. Another paid subscription base is Ovid. This is a product owned by the publishing company Wolters Kluwer. This enables searches of hundreds of databases, more than 1,200 journals and books from different publishers, all related to the health sciences or healthcare. Another one is the Web of Science. This is published by Thomson Scientific, which enables access to 5 different databases, including the Science Citation Index, Social Sciences Citation Index, Art and Humanities Citation Indexes, Index Chemicus, and Current Chemical Reactions. What these databases are these are linked to over 8,000 journals looking at the area of science, technology, social sciences, arts, and humanities. The 3 citation databases include references that have been cited by other articles, which can be useful if you want to find an earlier paper cited in the paper that you are reading. When we look at topics related to education and physical education, there are Physical Education Index, a subscription-based online service provided by the Cambridge Scientific Abstracts, and then also the Wilson Education Index, which is a subscription-based online service provided by EBSCO Publishing. Lastly, Sport Discuss is provided by EBSCO Publishing, which is a comprehensive source of full text for sports and sports medicine journals, and they also provide full text for over 500 journals. Once you found your preferred online literature search engine, such as PubMed for me, and you've kind of familiarized yourself with its features, you will then determine the best way to delimit your search. So this is going from thousands of research articles relating to a topic down to hundreds. So just to give you an example, if you're looking at exercise programs and obesity, you don't want to search just obesity or just even exercise programs. You want to search for obesity and exercise programs together. So this is kind of get a little bit more specific and hone into those research articles of that. But this is kind of your primary way to delimit or delimit. So just by defining the topic as specifically and narrow as possible. If you are having a little bit more with the, say, obesity and exercise program, if you want to be more specific, you can provide, circuit training and obesity and stuff like that, or following some sort of nutritional intervention as well. Another way to delimit your search is limit the number of views for the search. So generally speaking, if you have literature that's more than 10 years, this is kind of considered outdated, but that doesn't mean to always rule it out. So if you have a research paper that's more than 10 years, which is seminal, meaning that it brings it was important enough to spawn a new line of research, or it's kind of a foundational original paper, then it's important to acknowledge that original research paper, which can be dated, back in the 60s or 70s even, for your literature review. But this is going to vary by topic on how much information. So, some areas are going to have a lot of information, so that the 10 years cutoff will be appropriate, where other areas, that 10-year cutoff is going to expand to maybe 20 years, just because not a lot of research is taking place, or if it hasn't taken place, the process of measuring takes a long time. But you can also use other delimiters, such as humans, subjects, the language, and then key terms appearing only in abstracts. So if you look at an abstract area, you'll see keywords. I'll say, exercise, resistance training, obesity, so forth. So usually with the keywords, it's about 6 words, and those are words that you want to kind of focus on. So we went over this during our lecture of how to find a research article, how to use Zotero, and then referencing. Remember, with referencing, we always need to reference some sort of statement from the authors if you're utilizing it within your paper. And this is following it at the end of the sentence, and this is going to provide that in-text citation. And then once you have all your citations or references listed, or that you utilize within the paper, then it's going to generate a reference page. Remember, we can utilize reference software, software programs to make this a lot easier for us. So if you are submitting to one journal and then you get rejected from that journal and have to submit it to another, their referencing and citations might be a little bit different. So it's just a lot easier and less headache for you rather than doing it manually. But with these reference software programs, this allows storage and organization of your references. So remember, if you look at Zotero, once you add it from PubMed, the title, it gains all pulls all that information, such as the author's name, the volume, the journal, the year, and all that. And it'll save it for you so you can cite easily whenever you're writing in Word. These reference programs can provide numerous choices for different editorial styles. Generally speaking, always try to find initially a style that you like whenever you're writing, and then whenever you're submitting to the journal, you can change it to whatever their criteria is. But for our case, for this literature review that you're going to be writing, APA is going to be the preferred choice, kind of like our example in our lecture of utilizing Zotero. But we often utilize Zotero and then also EndNote, if you're familiar with that. So those are probably the two most popular reference management software programs out there. But there's some other ones such as Bookends, Papers, ProCite, RefWorks, and Senti. When you're selecting your papers to include in your literature review, you should make sure that the papers are either original research papers or a review paper related to your chosen topic. So make sure that it's, you're not reporting something, if you chose a topic of resistance training, make sure that you're not talking about aerobic training. But remember, and again, just to kind of harp on it, an original research paper is one that includes an abstract, an introduction, a method section, results section, and discussion section with some sort of summary or conclusion, sometimes within the subheading of the discussion. But a research journal is a journal that primarily publishes either original research papers or research review papers. But there are also other types of articles sometimes found in research journals in which you might also find while searching. One of them is the editorial position statements, in which the journal editor-in-chief writes usually a short piece designed to help orient readers to either a descriptive overview of the papers published in that particular issue or a new direction or format that the journal is adopting. Another kind of paper that you might find while searching is letters to the editor. This is usually kind of consisting of commentary on a previously published paper in that journal. So if the commentary is critical, though, from a certain group, the journal editor invites the authors of the paper being criticized the opportunity to write a response that appears following the letter of criticism. One of the last articles that you might stumble upon when searching some research papers is rapid communications. This is representing research that may have not yet been peer reviewed at the same level of rigor compared to an original research article, but it's going to have the potential for impact in the field, so that journal wants to put that information as fast as they can. An important thing to note is the distinction between research journals and professional journals. A research journal is a publication that includes original research papers and or research review papers, while a professional journal is a publication that includes articles of practical interest to professionals in a particular field. So once you kind of have identified the original research papers and possibly some research review papers related to your topic for your literature review, the next step is screening these papers for the quality. So the quality of published research papers varies widely. So when we think of the papers that you've kind of identified through searching through PubMed or Google Scholar or whatever search engine you utilize, not all of them will be necessarily of high quality. So ways to evaluate the quality of a given paper is looking at the journal that it was published in. A part of determining the quality of your paper is making sure that it went through a peer review process. And we kind of touched base on this in last lecture, but we'll kind of give you a refresher if necessary. But what you're doing is you are writing the paper itself. Pretty much this is going to be following a research study or even a review paper. But once you kind of finalize everything after you've gone through edits and proofreading through yourself, your mentor, and your other colleagues on the paper, you can submit it to the editor. And what the editor does is that sends this manuscript to 3 reviewers who are knowledgeable about the content. And these reviewers, you don't know who they are whenever they kind of read this and then send back information to you or feedback. They're just listed as reviewer 1, reviewer 2, and reviewer 3. And what these reviewers do are they compile a list of suggestions for improving your manuscript and then comment on the suitability of the manuscript for publication. Some suggestions are that they might ask you to take out something, or they may ask you to help improve it, add another citation, or add a description of a study to kind of fill in the gap of what you've already written. Some other reviewers, they're always trying to help improve your paper, but you'll also get comments from reviewers of, you didn't do anything right, or, you may have misread or misinterpreted the original research paper that you cited. So sometimes it's not always fun. And sometimes, some of their comments that they make, once you go through this process, you're just like, you mentioned it in the paper. So you just have to, kindly tell them that look at this sentence, and they'll get the understanding. Also, during this journal review process, the editor returns the suggestions to you, and then they are going to indicate whether that paper is either accepted, rejected, or needs revision. So it's always good whenever they send it back to you and it needs revision. So this is where, again, you're making edits based off their comments, and then you're responding to them as well. Rarely you're ever going to get your first submission to that journal accepted, unless it's really, really, really good. But you're always going to go in thinking that it's most likely going to be rejected. And whenever you are submitting, your research paper towards a certain journal, always kind of aim for the best one. And then based off that, if it goes through the review process, then it's going to make your paper a lot stronger. But always kind of go for the best one, I would say, and then, kind of go with your other choices. So some of the high quality journal characteristics contains the use of a peer review process, which we just talked about. Also looking at the journal's acceptance rate. So when we look at a journal's acceptance rate, this is usually about 15 to 20% of the papers that are submitted to us. So you want to find one that's a low acceptance rate, like this example. But journals do not usually kind of disclose their acceptance rates in their writing because, one, the acceptance rates kind of tend to vary throughout the calendar year. And then also may be dramatically different for domestic as compared to foreign submissions. And then also for certain types of categories of papers compared to others. Now, another thing is looking at the journal's reputation. So how long the journal has been, publishing research papers out there. And then based off that, journal, like did they publish, seminal papers that are very meaningful to the field. And then lastly, looking at the journal impact factor, which is a tool for kind of evaluating the journal quality. When looking at the journal impact factor, this is a number that reflects the average number of times that papers published in a journal within the past 2 years have been cited in subsequent published papers. So we can calculate this as A divided by B, where A equals the number of times papers published in a journal in, say, 2009 to 2010, or cited in indexed journals during 2011. And then we have B, which is the number of all papers published in the journal in 2009 to 2010. So how we get the 2011 journal impact is A divided by B, and this is that number. This is going to, again, may vary somewhat from year to year, but this is going to usually kind of stay on trend. And, the higher the number, the better or the higher quality the journal is. So in addition to the techniques for evaluating the quality of a journal, you need some sort of strategies for evaluating the papers that they publish. So as a beginner or as a beginner research writer, you might kind of feel daunted by the thought of having to discern the strengths and weaknesses of published papers. So you can kind of ask yourself a few simple questions, and looking at the introduction is that, do the first several sentences capture the reader's attention? Also, is there a compelling rationale for the study being presented? Also, do the authors in the introduction kind of make it clear how the present study fits within the body of existing literature? And then, is the purpose of the study clearly and concisely stated? When we are critiquing the method section, we should look and see if the participants' characteristics are clearly defined, such as the age or age range, whether they are trained or untrained, and if they have a descriptor of being what is trained and what is untrained, and then also other criteria as well. Also, is the apparatus or the instruments described in sufficient detail that another researcher could repeat the study? Also, we can look and critique, is the experimental protocol clearly spelled out, or do we have to try to guess and figure out when these measurements were taken? Just because whenever you start reading some of the original research papers out there, you'll look at their method section or read their methods section and kind of be a little bit confused on when these measurements were taken or how, or like kind of the time frame. Just because sometimes whenever you have an individual, say, consume a supplement, say protein following a workout, it's kind of important to kind of give a description on when they took it. So is that 30 minutes? Is it an hour, 2 hours? If you just have researchers just say that they took it following exercise, you are kind of lost on when that time frame is. And, it's very important because some of the response that you get from exercising or following exercise and consuming protein, you want to see that response in, time frame of looking at the different mechanisms. And lastly, within the method section, are the statistical procedures explained? Some questions to ask during the results section is the description of the results complete, concise, and well organized? Are the tables and graphs appropriately used to supplement the text without being redundant? And then are the tables and graphs clearly labeled, and do they contain enough information to kind of stand alone? Depending on your research question or the research article in itself, some of the tables and graphs can be very noisy and kind of messy in a way, in a sense, just because the authors of the research study tried putting so much information on these that it's just you have to really take your time looking at it. And this could be due to how many measurements are taken in these studies. But we want to make sure that when you are looking at the tables and graphs, you want to make sure they are mainly highlighting the main points, right? There are some variables that you want to put on tables and graphs, and then some are other variables you don't necessarily have to do that, or the importance of highlighting them are a little bit less compared to the main points. And lastly, are the interpretive comments saved for the discussion section? When it comes to the discussion section, we can ask ourselves, are the results related back to the hypothesis or the hypotheses? Also, are the results explained within the context of the results of similar studies? So are they kind of tying it back into past literature to kind of support them, or kind of possibly there may be some sort of refute of what the current findings they just found are? Are any unexplained factors or loose ends addressed? So we can mainly see these unexplained factors kind of talked about whenever they're talking about the results or some variable. So say, for example, you found that taking creatine didn't increase strength as a previous study. So how did the authors explain this factor? Were there other confounding variables that have taken place which may have kind of messed with the data or the results? What is that? Also, you can also find these loose ends being addressed or unexplained factors within the limitation section. And this is also towards kind of the end of the discussion, but before the conclusion section as well. So this is indicating why they couldn't do some sort of measurement, or why they didn't include some sort of population such as women in their study. Lastly, are the conclusions appropriate given the results and delimitations of the study? So we just went over the questions to ask about the certain sections of a paper, but some general questions for critiquing a paper is the reader left with the feeling of, so what? So that means the paper wasn't really interesting, didn't really bring any meaningful information that the author or the reader or audience already knew. Another general question is it clear that this study was worth conducting? Was the study actually interesting? Some studies aren't as interesting as others, or if you're reading one, you might not find it as interesting compared to other people. Another big thing for critiquing was the paper well written? Some papers that you're going to read, they're just going to be, the logical flow and everything's just not going to be there. So you're going to be, after initially reading the paper, you're just going to be confused. But, with that type of paper, you're going to have to read twice, maybe 3 times, maybe even 4 times, just because the paper isn't written, and can be frustrating to actually understand what the authors are trying to say. Did the study uncover any new information? Did it add anything? And lastly, do the results of the study form the basis for new research questions? So all of these are kind of something that you want to kind of go into when you're critiquing a research paper, but there are some other things as well that you'll pick up whenever you read a lot more. Now, since you're about to write a literature review, a good literature review organizes and synthesizes the important information relevant to the topic of the review. So with initially writing a literature review or writing any research paper, some common errors for beginners is stringing together a series of disjointed paragraphs, with each paragraph describing an individual research paper. So when we're talking about this, is that usually you'll kind of state, you'll give an introduction paragraph, and then move on to say this study and give another paragraph, and then the following paragraph would be saying this other study did so and so. So that's not ideal for you, but it's common for beginners. But what the goal is to combine these multiple research papers into 1 or 2 sentences or a paragraph. So when you are writing a paragraph, those two papers that you would normally at the beginning have 2 separate paragraphs where you combine them into one. So if they have similar results of exercise decreases blood pressure, you can say a study done by this author and the other author found that exercising for 60 minutes decreases blood pressure. So that's something that you want to consider, and particularly when synthesizing. You also, whenever you're writing a good literature review, it is organized by subtopics that flow into a logically organized fashion. So make sure that you're not having scrambled areas of discussing one thing, moving on to the next section of discussing about something else, and then the following sentence or paragraph going back to the other area that you were talking about. Lastly, we don't want to use another student's thesis as a model for your literature review. So your literature reviews are always going to be somewhat different from each other, but we want to make sure that when you're writing, it's your own writing. So this is kind of showing your characteristics or your writing skills to the audience. So when you're first writing your literature review, as a student, the general purpose is to kind of explain some certain areas. One is why your topic is of interest or importance. So why did you choose this topic that you want to write about? Also, you kind of want to explain what related research has been published on your topic before. So again, we want to kind of synthesize multiple research studies into a couple sentences or a paragraph, just not separate paragraphs within themselves. And lastly, which important question remains unanswered? Is it something, again, long-term that hasn't been looked at? Is it a certain population? Is it some sort of dosage? What is the unanswered question? So that's kind of your general purpose of your literature review. There's some other purposes that can also be playing a role as well, such as mentioning or that there's little documenting or little to no research that has been done within that area, or there's a new emerging area in itself. You can also look at demonstrating that there's a controversy or a disagreement. And lastly, explaining why a study using new state-of-the-art instrumentation or methodology is needed to reevaluate an existing belief. With writing, you want to determine the scope and perspective of the review and the papers to include. So this is where you're doing your online searches and gathering all of the original research papers and then reading them and then picking the ones that you want to include or what you might exclude. So what you want to do is, once you have that clear understanding and what you want to accomplish, the next step is preparing an outline. And this begins with an introduction, ends with a summary, and then also this is including some logically organized subsections in the middle. So what we want to do is kind of have a skeleton outline where you're having an introduction portion, and then you're having the body of that kind of paragraph with subsections of maybe you're going to be talking about this study, and then followed by that sentence of that study, come up with another sentence that has a couple studies, adding or kind of supporting their findings or refuting it, and then kind of moving on and then kind of summarizing it within that paragraph to kind of transition into the next one. When developing the outline for your introduction, let's keep in mind the following purposes for the introduction. First, we want to capture the reader's attention, and this is by the very first sentence that you're writing for your literature review. In some cases, this might be the entire first paragraph where you're trying to capture the reader's attention. But during this first paragraph, we should clearly describe why the topic area is of interest and why it's also important. Next, we want to kind of explain or identify for the audience the major subtopics that's being included in the body of the review and explain why they are relevant. Depending on how many subtopics you address, this explanation may require one or more several paragraphs. Also, something else is that sometimes it's useful to explain to the audience what potentially related subtopics will not be included, and then provide some sort of reason why. So, say for example, you're writing a review, which sections on, say, the incidence of low back pain, and then the causes of back pain, and what are the structures or reasons why we get back pain. But you'll state that you're not going to address the treatment protocol. You just kind of want to focus on what's the theory, or what are some of the reasons why we're getting back pain and different ways to get back pain. To determine how many subsections you'll need in the body of your paper and what you should call them, think carefully about two things. One is the purpose of the review, and then secondly, the available relevant papers that you have selected from the literature. These considerations should drive your choice of some sort of organization for your body of the paper. So we can assign each subsection its own descriptive subtitle. So for instance, you can discuss the different methodological approaches to a problem area. You can have different subtopics within the larger area of your particular interests. And also, you can have areas of agreement and areas of controversy in the related literature. As you're constructing the outline for the body of your paper, you can do a few things that kind of help. One is jotting down the papers that you want to include beneath the subsection headings where you plan to discuss them. If you have one paper that you will initially put in, but then you read it, it doesn't really fit or logically fit, you can try to fit it somewhere else, or you can just exclude it. But during the body of your paper, you also want to list the main points you wish to make. Not only that, when you're trying to make the main points you wish to make, is that you are not only trying to summarize what each of these papers have done, but you also want to interpret the findings within the context of your theme or perspective that you have chosen, whether that's you're taking a positive approach towards the paper, or you're trying to kind of indicate that the literature is wrong and that you want something else to be done. But when we look at the summarization of these papers, we want to summarize them in a sentence or two, and then if anything, depending on how detail you want to get on a certain paper, this can be a little bit longer. But generally speaking, you want to highlight the bigger research articles on making those the longer sentences, or possibly telling that in the paragraph, where others can just be used as a reference point, or you're just quickly mentioning it in a sentence. Lastly, we want to start paraphrasing to avoid plagiarism. So when we're paraphrasing, we're not taking word for word from the authors, just because remember the copyright restriction that we talked about last lecture. So we also want to make sure that we're not doing that, but also referencing the work for these individuals to give them credit too. We also, even though we can include direct quotations, some research articles do that. Generally speaking, it's not ideal. Again, you're kind of losing the flow of the paper, and kind of makes the reader, somewhat uninterested in a way, but there are very, very, very few times that it works. So just kind of a basic understanding is don't use any direct quotes whenever you are writing your literature review for this course. The last thing we'll talk about is summary, and this is usually confined to one paragraph. This is a section where you highlight the main points that you have already detailed in the subsections of the paper. It is not really intended to be placed where you introduce new information or actually share your plans for your own study. So the pretty much intent of the summary is to reinforce the take-home message from your literature review. There are different ways to title the summary section, and this is going to be based off the goal of your literature review, and then based off your faculty mentor when you are writing your thesis or dissertation. But some examples are summary and conclusions, summary and recommendations, or just summary. So if you're using the title summary, right? So after you are done presenting the main points or highlighting your main points from the body of the review, you'll construct a short additional paragraph that relates the gap you have identified in the literature to kind of the proposed plans for your own study. And this is only talking about during your thesis and dissertation. But hopefully by now or following this lecture, you kind of get a little bit better understanding on how to kind of write a literature review, and hopefully you can apply these different techniques and general guidelines for writing your own for this class. Some things that need to be completed for next week, Monday, September 28th by 11:59 p.m. is quiz 3 and then the article review assignment by Rosso and colleagues. Again, please submit this assignment as a Word document file or PDF file, and please no screenshots or pictures taken of it. Also, last thing is to email me for approval for your literature review and presentation topic. And this is due by September 28th. Only if you have actually contacted me about your literature review and presentation topic. So make sure that you guys think of what you want and then email me, because this may take a few emails back and forth. So you need to receive an email me stating sounds good or I approve for your approval for your literature review and presentation.